Oh, maybe on television.
Just have a sit and have a cake.
I'm going to get a cake.
Yeah, let's go then. Who wants what, when and how? First in line, tea or coffee?
Well,
morning tea at the old Railway Square site, and that's the old Railway Square building built in the 1930s. The older members here, of course, might remember a little bit of meetings that would go on there. I mean, there were two places going out to the outer suburbs like Rooty Hill or Windsor and so on. Of course, you'd catch the South Pacific Electric Railway, and the tram collection started to grow. In 1965 they ran their first tram over on the other side of the road. We'll pass that as we go through. And in 1988 they started the operations over here. Straps were there only for the conductor to let the driver know that it was safe to proceed. So without any further ado, we'll proceed. It's the oldest signal box in the New South Wales system, and it is approximately where Lofty Station used to be. Lofty Station has progressively moved towards the city, and probably one day it'll have its own city. You've got to get to them and make them happy. It takes us a few seconds to cross the road. Some of the locals thought that this was going to be a terrible stoppage for the traffic.
Sorry.
we're on. No, we're not.
Too quickly. Our driver wasn't, so but anyhow, they sometimes happen. But in 1988 they moved across to the other side. There was on the plans a road to go right through that building, but the transport people decided not to make the road. But now they've changed their minds. Well, we're actually running on a railway line, which is exactly the same gauge by road, so they have to upgrade the road and down to through Bulli Pass, and of course they named it after the Prince, so it became the Prince's Highway. That was Prince Edward, who later became Edward VIII, a gentleman who married Mrs. Simpson and abdicated by the National Parks people after the Second World War, because they required some of the land ahead of us for a visitor centre and teleport and carport. It's of course of no use to us, that railway station, because the tram is away down further down the station surface. But on the right hand side is the part of the original railway station built in the 1880s, 1889.
The next one. I'll run after it. They can have their share of lunch.
No, we're in now.
Yeah.
No, it's just a bit of fleecy. So cozy.
Yeah, that's right.
There is a bit of a myth about the people of Watson's Bay and Vaucluse having received or having only the best trams in Sydney. It wasn't quite true, because the old, on that particular run they had little four-wheelers or jumping jacks, and they were becoming rather decrepit and they weren't very, very comfortable, so the new cars were introduced and placed entirely down at Rushcutters Bay, the depot down there. And there were a lot of horses. In fact, in 1900 they counted 30,000 horses walking past the Sydney Town Hall. So you can imagine what the floors of the trams would be like, and you might notice that the very early trams had a yellow painted floor for obvious reasons. But anyhow, around 1918, 19, the people who smoked, they also chewed. So they chewed their tobacco and got all the goodies out of it, and then when it was time to get rid of it, well, the best thing to do was and down onto the floor. Well, of course, that mess was so difficult to remove, they had to put the signs up. 1919, £2 was approximately a week's wages. Well, anyhow, when we get back, the Beach Wheels people will take you for a walk through the complex, and we'll make sure, of course, that you get lunch as well. Well, you might want to walk through and take first, please.
railway mission.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of that?
No, right.
Well done.
Very interesting.
I think it's highly dangerous having that level crossing.
Restored trams here and sent them to Western Australia and New Zealand. We have 2 trams sent to New Zealand. One is a restaurant car and the other one is a tourist vehicle. And we've sent trams like that one over there out to the bush where people have been wanted to make them into sleepyards. And of course we've restored our own trams as well. One over there is exactly the same as the one you rode in. In fact, it's what we call channel canning. And one of our workers here, we do have a number of railway men, and he worked on the overhead to put the overhead. We brought him here, and there was a great deal of argument and discussion about it because it was in such a derelict condition. You may have seen it years ago. It was near where the new tunnel goes into the goes out to the airport. It was often fitted under the trams. That's a motor, it's a tram motor. And of course if you were to go to a little bit of know-how, we've been able to accumulate certain things to make life easy. Electrically operated, and we can move it along those rails so that we can line them up with any one of these spots up here, and we can drag the trams in or out, whatever we like. We can drive them in if we like, or mostly we push them in with a forklift or something similar. And they're easy to move, or even though they weigh up. The Berliners would have used it, spent some time up in the Hunter Valley. We did have an apprentice group up there that was attached to the government. The signalman up there would stand, he had a good view of all the traffic in Sydney, and as the trams came along he'd read their destination signs and send them off to wherever they were supposed to go. He'd climb up through, there's a little ladder there, he'd climb up, you can't see the ladder because it's on the other side, through the trapdoor, through the door, and inside he has a water tap. He has a little electric burner to make his coffee, tea or soup, and of course he's got a toilet because he had to stay there for a long time. I've mentioned the magic number of 1961. In February 1961 the trams finished, but they actually started in 1861, and so it was 100 years of tram travel. And as I say to the kids, guess how old I am, and they'll all say 100, so they remember very, very well that it's 100 years of tram travel. It wasn't very popular with the merchants and the folk of Sydney because the rail tracks were about so far off the ground, and crossing Pitt Street was a bit of a menace on either side of the harbour. But as you can see from the photo, they were very, very small and therefore not really effective. They even tried steam buses, but you might notice that they were hard rubber wheels, very, very heavy on the rear end, and they only seated a few people. And of course, as soon as it rained, the roads became virtually unusable. It has a funny sort of history, but I don't know that. But they had a very, very large tramway system, about 320 kilometres. Well, as I mentioned, it was a very, very complex system. Now, around about 1900, the estimate was that about half of the population of Sydney was illiterate. So they had a problem getting people here, there and everywhere, but it was a very easily solved problem because from the steam tram days they used to put funny lines on the fronts of the train. So when the electrification of the system occurred, they said, well, we'll run a line through Sydney and we'll call one part of it red and one part of it green. And therefore, the red signs of Sydney and green signs, and then there were others, of course, that somebody going to say, what about Rosebery or something, or blue ones or something or other like that. But there were a loop, but it would have meant the taking up of a lot of property. But anyhow, one gentleman came along with a very, very wonderful idea, and he said, I think I can solve the problem. We don't know how much he was paid because it's one of those secret things and we never found out what the money was, even though he took them to court in the end. But anyhow, he came up with the idea of a dummy sitting on the rails, travelling on the normal tram track. The dummy would be attached to a long cable which would run underground, down around a pulley and be attached to a weight on a separate little track underground. And there are some photos of it over there. The idea was that the tram would come along, meet the dummy at the top, then the driver would proceed very, very slowly down the hill, and it appeared that he was pushing the dummy down the hill. Came along and fixed up the lantern in dusk. Another one came along. Of course, that funny little lane that went down onto the back as well. But anyhow, the people at Meadowbank came up with an idea, and they presented the tramway people with that style of tram. And they said, try it out, and if you think it's any good, we'll perhaps be able to do something. So they tried it out, and they found it was very good. So they then put in an order for the rest of the 250-odd tram. Put a great big length of steel down onto the tracks, and that was an added braking system. And of course the way down into Neutral Bay was quite windy and very hilly, so these smaller cars were used for that type of travel. And if you and harking back to the good cars that were used on the Watsons Bay line, well, originally they used these sorts of things. So you can imagine it was a long, rather bumpy trip to go out to Watsons Bay riding on one of these. But of course, if you were a child, and I can remember them during the war years, it was great to be able to sit up there with a driver. And of course, the inside part for the ladies with their string bags and their blue ridge hairs and their knitting and so on. And the outside part for all of those men with their pipes and so forth. Passenger car. And then they were introduced these larger vehicles. So they converted that little one up in the front to a breakdown car. It was used on the Enfield line, and which was a separate little line like the Rockdale and Manly so on. And so it really wasn't used at all. So it's about 90% original, that car. We've got another one identical to it out in the shed, and it's about 90% unoriginal. It's the old prison car, and it was the only purpose-built prison car in the world, we believe, until some Germans came out here about a year ago, and they thought that there was one built in Bremen in the 1930s, but we're still not quite sure. But certainly the only one in the southern hemisphere. It has inside 6 cells. There are 2 for females and 4 for males. It means that girls are better than boys, so the children tell me. It has seating inside each cell, which is amazing, for 6 people. And they can put them more in a crush episode, I suppose, by lifting the seats. But anyhow, there's 6 cells, 6 people in each cell. Tram trundled backwards and forwards from Long Bay Jail to Taylor Square for the court, the appearances of the poor prisoners. Not a very pleasant tram. Even the tram crews that used it were not very happy about using it. The cleaners were even less happy because I believe it got itself into a bit of a mess at times. As you can well imagine, some of the people that were travelling in it and what they would do.
What about one that carried the nurse?
Oh, that was from Newcastle. Yes, that was out to the cemetery. He was a very keen escaper, and he'd escaped from a road vehicle earlier that year, 1946.
And he was on here too.
And he had a ride on there, and they said, well, Darcy will never escape, we're pretty right. But they were silly enough to let him work in the kitchen. And of course he stole a bread knife. So while the tram was trundling from Long Bay Jail out towards the Taylor Square, Darcy was quite busily cutting his way through the roof. Now it had a steel floor, but like all trams it has a very, very thin wooden roof with an overlay of canvas. Punched a hole through, missed the overhead wiring, of course at 600 volts of direct current, which would make his hair stand on end a bit, and forced his way out through the roof, jumped off and ran away into Moore Park, and was later on picked up about a day later at Gladesville, Hunters Hill, looking for his mum, but she didn't live out. These little panels are broken up into the roof, the upper section, the bottom section, and of course finally down where the wheels are. In 1896 that was all mostly varnished wood, stained and varnished, 1900 they used some paint, there's the paint system for there. 1906 they changed it, and always the paint had to be very fast paint. In other words, it wouldn't fade and do all the terrible things that the paints used to do when they were full of red lead and so on. After the war, of course, there were a lot of war paint left, hence the war colours. And in fact, some of the old service, the prison cars painted that way, and the whole fleet that was up in Newcastle was also painted in the same fashion. Then when, as I mentioned, they introduced the corridor cars, Jack Lang introduced those, they went for the green and cream. However, the people in North Sydney were a little bit upset about the whole system. They said we should have a special colour for us because we are living near the harbour. So they proposed that they have the two blues, the light and the dark. One of them faded very, very quickly, and the other one blistered. So they had to scrap that idea. But the authorities kept it in mind, and they decided that that was a good idea, Sydney Harbour being the wonderful place it is. So they kept those colours in mind. So you may remember that the trains were painted in the two blues, the buses of course were painted in the two blues, the ferries were painted in the two blues, and lo and behold our new light rail, if you can see under all of the advertising, are two blues. So they maintained the whole system. But when they drove the tram into the Wynyard tunnels, they found the crown was too big. So poor old Queen lost her crown. But she didn't abdicate. We're going to go out into the running shed. You're still able?
Oh yes. To get up underneath the tram to repair things.
The old rattlers, and then of course they went on to another form of crossbench car. The one with Elizabeth Street and Circular Quay up on it, and they were the 5. And then after that they moved into the corridor.
We'll see about getting that one out shortly. We'll see about getting that one out shortly.
All right, Peter's going to try and get this one out. This is the one we wanted to give you a ride on, but it's been a bit sick this morning.
Yeah, I think she'll be right here.
Sydney car, along, fairs, please, open the doors. And of course people used to talk to each other in those days because the conductor couldn't reach right across. And they'd say, oh yes, where are you going to? We're not going anywhere with it though. The Newcastle tram is like the one across the other side. I don't know whether we can sneak across there and I'll show you the Newcastle tram. Well anyhow, this is the Japanese one, and the little one here is one of the early 1890 vehicles. This is the one that I mentioned was about 90% unoriginal, but we take them out. Behind it we've got a German tram, but still and very rough to ride in. Still, that was their way. They're very fit Germans. Yes, if you're not fit, you go somewhere else.
Very tall, that's the other thing.
Yeah.
Very tall.
And we can't use it in summer. It's just about dying there. It's too hot.
Hot, is it really?
In the 1940s. But that vehicle, very few people would have seen it because it was mostly placed in the underground at Wynyard. But that's one of its uses. This one here. On the other side, we won't go across there.
Some workplaces are dangerous and shouldn't be, because they could be made much safer. But people are careless. So you've got all these factors. So cold we wanted to get out into the... But I didn't. Oh, it came through. Yeah, I was ashamed of myself there.
Opposite one of the pubs, which we think is a great idea for a tram terminus. We hope one day we'll get there. In the meantime, this tram, of course, is the one of the typical toast rack trams. One of the modern ones, because it was only built in the 1920s. These were the last of the toast rack style built. The earlier ones, which you saw the examples in the museum hall, were better known to a lot of people because they ran on just about every tram line in Sydney, the ones with the open compartments at each end. And of course up till 1939, and some of you may possibly remember this, some of those trams were running from Manly Wharf up to Narrabeen and also to Harbord Beach and through Balgowlah to the Spit on the northern side of the Spit. And of course to get the tram down to North Sydney you had to walk across the old Spit Bridge
before the bridge was built. It would have been a punt, but anyway, and then get the tram from the other side of the spit down to North Sydney or wherever you were going.
brought back a lot of memories, and please, when you get off the coach, remember to take everything with you. I say this every time. There's always somebody leaves something. So please make sure you've got all your belongings, your bags, your handbags, umbrellas and everything else that you brought while you were down at the Tramway Museum. Have a safe journey for the rest of the journey home.
Thank you to Frank for all his organisation. So can we express our thanks to both of them?
Into action. I'll see you again.
Okay. Get everything. I better get to check the message. Okay, pleasure. Have you done all stiff?